Maybe you arrived here because something inside you changed. It wasn't a loud change, it wasn't dramatic like in the movies, but it was definitive. One day you woke up and realized that the things that used to move you, that made you get out of bed with that fire in your eyes, simply don't have the same effect anymore. It's as if someone had flipped a switch inside your chest. The goals you chased with such intensity now seem like empty sets in an abandoned theater. The dreams that fed you have lost their shine, like stars that slowly fade in the dawn sky. And you ask yourself in that unsettling silence of the early morning, what happened to me? Where did that person go who had plans, who had ambitions, who knew exactly what they wanted from life? You look around and see people running, chasing, fighting, striving, and you feel an immense distance between you and them, as if you had crossed an invisible door, and now you're on the other side, watching a game you can no longer play. And worst of all, what really scares you is that you don't miss that fire. You feel a strange peace, mixed with an emptiness that no one around you seems to understand. If this resonates with you, if these words touch something you can barely name, then you need to hear what Albert Camus, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, has to say about this peculiar state of the human soul. Because what you're experiencing isn't laziness, it isn't depression in the clinical sense, it isn't failure, it's something much deeper, and paradoxically, much more liberating than you imagine. In the next minutes, we'll explore together why the lack of motivation after spiritual awakening isn't a problem to be solved, but rather a portal to a radically different way of existing in the world. There is a moment in some people's lives that functions as a silent rupture. It's not something you can mark on a calendar, it's not an event you can easily share on social media, but it's as real as the ground beneath your feet. It's the moment when you begin to see through structures that previously seemed solid as concrete. You're at work, fulfilling your tasks, doing everything you've always done. But now there's a soft voice in your head asking, what exactly am I doing this for? And it's not a rebellious question, it's not an adolescent questioning full of drama. It's a genuine question, almost innocent, that arises from a very deep place inside you. You begin to notice that much of what you call your goals, your objectives, your ambitions, were actually installed in you by a complex system of external expectations. That promotion you so desire, when you really stop to think about it, you don't even know anymore why you want it so badly. Is it because it will bring you genuine happiness, or because it will validate your existence in the eyes of others? Is it because it represents something meaningful to you, or because it's the next expected rung on the ladder everyone is climbing? Camus understood this moment better than almost any other thinker. He called it the encounter with the absurd. But what does this really mean in the practice of your life? The absurd isn't something negative, it's not a pessimistic conclusion about existence. It's simply the recognition that there is a fundamental mismatch between the human desire for meaning and the indifference of the universe. We are born wanting things to make sense, wanting our life to have a clear purpose, a defined direction, a transcendent meaning. But when you stop distracting yourself, when you turn off the constant noise of society and look directly at reality, what you find is silence. Not a terrifying silence, but a neutral silence, a universe that simply doesn't care about our elaborate narratives about meaning and purpose. And it's exactly at this moment of recognition that something curious happens to your motivation. The things that used to propel you were sustained by an implicit belief that achieving those goals would somehow resolve the fundamental question of your existence. You thought that if you got that job, that relationship, that recognition, that achievement, then finally you would feel that your life makes sense. But spiritual awakening, this moment of seeing through illusions, reveals an inconvenient truth. No external achievement will fill that existential void, because the void isn't a problem to be solved. It's the basic condition of human existence. We are conscious beings in a universe that wasn't designed to provide us with ready-made meaning. And when you truly absorb this truth, when it penetrates beyond the intellectual level and becomes a lived understanding, something interesting happens to that frantic motivation that used to move your life. It begins to drain away like water slipping through your fingers. You continue doing things, continue living your life, but that desperate urgency, that feeling that you need to conquer something to prove your worth, to justify your existence, simply disappears. And this, my friend, what you're feeling isn't lack of motivation in the conventional sense. It's the collapse of a specific type of motivation. Motivation based on escaping from yourself, motivation fueled by the illusion that there's some future destination where you'll finally be complete, fulfilled, at peace. Let's dive deeper into this territory, because this is crucial to understanding what's happening to you. Before awakening, your life was sustained by a series of implicit promises. Society promised you that if you studied hard enough, worked hard, followed the rules, eventually you would find lasting satisfaction. Your parents, your institutions, your culture, all conspired not maliciously, but unconsciously to convince you that happiness is always one step ahead, always in the next achievement, always in the next milestone of accomplishment. And you bought this narrative completely, because everyone around you also bought it. You looked at the adults in your childhood and assumed they knew what they were doing, that they had discovered the secret, that they were living lives full of meaning. But now, on the other side of awakening, you realize that most people are just executing a script, playing a role, following movements that were taught to them without ever deeply questioning why. Camus saw this clearly in the society around him. He observed people waking up every day at the same time, taking the same bus, going to the same job, returning home exhausted, watching television to forget the exhaustion, sleeping, and then repeating everything again the next day. And he wondered, where is the real life in this mechanical routine? Where is the moment when the person stops and asks themselves if this is really what they want, if this is really what makes sense to them? But asking this question is dangerous, because once you ask it genuinely, once you look directly at the absurd of the human condition, you can no longer return to the comfortable unconsciousness of before. It's like watching a magician do a trick, being amazed by the illusion, and then seeing exactly how the trick works. After you see behind the scenes, after you understand the mechanism, you can never again have that same experience of naive wonder. And this is exactly what happens to your previous motivation. It was fueled by an illusion, by the belief that external achievements had intrinsic meaning, that your accomplishments defined your worth as a person, that success in the world would finally quiet that fundamental restlessness inside you. But now you see through it. You realize that no matter how many goals you achieve, there will always be another goal after. No matter how much recognition you receive, there will always be a voice inside questioning if it's enough. No matter how much money you accumulate, there will always be a void that money cannot fill. And this perception doesn't come from cynicism, doesn't come from bitterness or disappointment. It comes simply from looking honestly at the nature of human existence. We are finite beings in an infinite universe, conscious beings aware of our own mortality, seeking permanent meaning in a world of constant change. This is the absurd condition that Camus identified, and once you recognize it, you can no longer motivate yourself in the same unconscious way as before. The naivety is gone, the innocence is lost, and you're standing in the middle of your life asking, now what? What do I do with this awareness? How do I live, knowing what I now know? Pause for a moment here and let this really sink in. Because what we're exploring isn't some abstract theory, it's the real texture of your lived experience now. And I want to hear from you. What was it that triggered your awakening? Was it a loss that forced you to question everything? Was it a moment of unexpected quietness where you suddenly saw through the layers of conditioning? Was it a gradual accumulation of small perceptions that eventually reached a critical mass? Leave your comment below sharing your experience, because when you put into words what you're living through, something magical happens. You begin to integrate the experience in a new way. And besides, your story might be exactly what another person needs to hear today, to feel less alone on this journey. So really, pause the video for a moment if you need to, go to the comments, and share what resonated with you so far. Which part of this description touched something true in your experience? I read all the comments and respond to many of them personally, because these conversations are the most valuable part of this work. Now let's go to the more delicate territory, the territory where most people stumble and fall into despair, because recognizing the absurd is one thing, but continuing to live with this awareness is something completely different. There is a period, and maybe you're in it now, where you feel suspended between two worlds. You can no longer return to the comfortable unconsciousness of before, but you also haven't yet discovered how to live authentically with your new awareness. It's as if you had taken off a mask, but haven't yet discovered your real face underneath it. And in this intermediate space, in this existential limbo, traditional motivation simply doesn't work anymore. You try to push yourself, try to force yourself to care about the things that used to matter. But it's like trying to force a plant to grow faster by pulling its leaves. It doesn't work that way. Real transformation happens at its own pace, in its own time, and trying to rush it only creates more suffering. Camus deeply understood this territory because he himself went through it. He saw people around him responding to the absurd in three main ways. The first response is what he called philosophical suicide, which is when you flee from the absurd by throwing yourself into some belief system that promises ready-made meaning. You become fanatical about some ideology, lose yourself in some dogmatic religion, or bury yourself so deeply in work and distractions that you never have to face the existential question head-on. It's a form of killing yourself without dying physically. It's killing your consciousness, your capacity to question, your authenticity. And you may feel the temptation of this now. Part of you wants to return to the innocence of before, wants to find some guru who tells you exactly what to do. Some system that frees you from the responsibility of creating your own meaning. But you've gone too far already. You've seen too much. Returning to unconsciousness is no longer a real option for you. The second response that Camus identified is literal suicide, the conclusion that if life has no inherent meaning, then it's not worth living. And he vehemently rejected this response, because the fact that life has no given meaning doesn't mean it can't have created meaning. The fact that the universe is indifferent doesn't mean your experience is worthless. On the contrary, it's precisely because there is no guaranteed meaning that you have the radical freedom to create meaning yourself. You're not bound to follow a cosmic script. You're not limited by some predetermined purpose. You're free, terribly free, frighteningly free, to make of your life what you want. And this freedom, Camus argued, is the very foundation for an authentic and full life. But here's the challenge. When you're in the middle of the transition, when you're in the space between the old way of living and the new, this freedom doesn't feel liberating. It feels terrifying. It feels paralyzing. Because with total freedom comes total responsibility. There's no one left to blame for your choices. There's no external system left to tell you if you're on the right path. You're thrown back on yourself, on your own capacity for discernment, on your own creation of values. And this is where the lack of motivation begins to make sense in a completely new way. You're not unmotivated because there's something wrong with you. You're unmotivated in relation to the old goals because they're no longer authentic to who you're becoming. They were borrowed goals, imported from a value system that you didn't consciously choose but passively absorbed. And now that you've awakened, now that you see through this system, these goals have lost their power over you. It's like trying to get excited about a game whose rules you realize are arbitrary and whose prizes you realize are empty. The problem isn't lack of motivation. The problem is that you're still trying to motivate yourself using an obsolete system of meaning. You're trying to use an old map to navigate new territory. And of course that doesn't work. Of course that leaves you feeling lost and directionless. Because you're in a process of profound transition. You're in the middle of a transformation that will fundamentally change how you relate to everything in your life. And this process cannot be rushed, cannot be bypassed, cannot be solved with productivity techniques or motivational mantras. Camus had a solution, and it was the third response to the absurd, the response he considered the only authentic and worthy one. He called it revolt. But don't confuse this with rebellion in the common sense, with being against everything and everyone just to be against. The revolt that Camus proposes is something much more subtle and much deeper. It's the conscious and deliberate decision to live fully, to embrace life in all its richness and complexity, precisely because it is absurd, precisely because it has no guaranteed meaning. It's looking directly at the indifference of the universe and saying, even so I choose to live, I choose to create, I choose to love. I choose to experience everything that existence has to offer, not because it will take me somewhere, not because it will solve something, but simply because I can, because I'm here, because this is my response to the absurd condition of being alive. And this revolt, this yes to life despite the absurd, is what eventually restores your motivation, but in a completely transformed way. The new motivation that emerges is no longer based on fleeing from yourself or chasing external validation. It's a motivation that comes from being deeply present in your experience, from being genuinely connected with what you authentically value, not with what you were taught to value. It's a motivation that doesn't need grandiose justifications or promises of future rewards. It's simply the natural impulse of a conscious human being who decided to live according to their own created values, who decided to make art simply because they love creating, who decided to help others simply because they feel empathy, who decided to seek knowledge simply because curiosity is part of who they are. There's no longer the need to prove anything, to reach some final state of accomplishment. Life becomes about the process, about the journey, about each moment lived fully instead of each moment being sacrificed on the altar of some idealized future. And this is the beautiful paradox that Camus invites us to embrace. When you stop chasing meaning and accept the absurd, when you stop trying to escape from yourself through external achievements and begin to simply live, you discover a much deeper and more authentic type of meaning. Not a meaning you find out there, but a meaning you create at each moment through your choices, your actions, your presence. Think of Sisyphus, the character from Greek mythology that Camus used as his central metaphor for the human condition. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to push an enormous rock to the top of a mountain, only to watch it roll back down and then have to start all over again, repeating this absurd task for all eternity. At first glance, it seems like the perfect definition of a meaningless life, of useless effort, of perpetual suffering. But Camus asks us to imagine Sisyphus happy. Happy? How is this possible? How can anyone be happy in such a clearly absurd situation? And Camus's answer is revolutionary. Sisyphus can be happy when he stops resisting the absurd of his situation and begins to embrace it. When he stops wishing things were different and begins to find meaning in the very act of pushing the rock. When he becomes present in the process instead of obsessed with an outcome that will never happen. And this, my friend, is exactly what's available to you now. Your life may seem absurd. Waking up, working, eating, sleeping, repeating, building things that will crumble, creating relationships that will end, pursuing goals that lose their shine as soon as they're achieved. When you look at it this way, when you look from the perspective of eternity or the indifferent universe, everything seems futile. But this perspective, while true on one level, is not the only perspective available. You can also look from the perspective of your lived experience, of your present moment, of your capacity to find beauty in small things, to create connection with other human beings, to experience joy not because it's eternal, but precisely because it's fleeting. The rose is beautiful not despite withering in a few days, but because it withers in a few days. If it lasted forever, it would lose its preciousness. And the same is true for each moment of your life. Each experience has value, not because it lasts forever, or because it means something transcendent, but simply because it's happening, because you're conscious of it, because you have the extraordinary capacity to be present for it. And when you begin to live this way, when you begin to embrace the absurd instead of fleeing from it, something magical happens. You discover that the lack of motivation was just a phase, a necessary period of detachment from old patterns so that new patterns could emerge. It was as if you needed to completely empty the cup before you could fill it with something new. And what begins to arise isn't the frantic and anxious motivation of before, but something calmer, deeper, more sustainable. It's a motivation that comes from being aligned with who you really are, not with who you think you should be. It's a motivation that doesn't need constant external fuel because it's generated internally, from your own passion for life, from your own revolt against the indifference of the universe. You begin to do things not because it will take you somewhere grand, but simply because you choose to do them, because they express something authentic in you, because they're your way of saying yes to life despite everything. So let's talk about what this looks like in practice, because until now we've been in philosophical territory, and you might be wondering, okay, I understand the concept, but how do I actually live this in my day-to-day? How do I pay my bills with this philosophy? How do I maintain relationships? How do I find enough purpose to get out of bed in the morning? And these are absolutely valid questions because philosophy that cannot be lived isn't philosophy. It's just mental games. Camus knew this. He wasn't an ivory tower philosopher. He lived through World War II, fought in the French Resistance, experienced poverty and illness and loss. His philosophy didn't come from abstract speculation, but from direct confrontation with the harsh realities of human existence. And what he discovered is that living authentically with awareness of the absurd doesn't mean becoming passive or nihilistic. It means becoming more alive, more present, more engaged, but in a different way. First, you stop wasting energy trying to find or create some cosmic meaning for your life. You accept that there is no divine plan, no predetermined destiny, no universal purpose waiting to be discovered. And instead of this being depressing, you discover that it's incredibly liberating, because it means you can't be wrong in the fundamental sense. There's no right path you should be following. There's no ideal version of your life that you're failing to achieve. There's only the life you're living, moment by moment, choice by choice. And every choice is equally valid from the universe's point of view, which means you're free to choose based on what truly resonates with you, not on what you think you should choose. You want to be an artist, but everyone expects you to be a doctor. From the perspective of the absurd, both choices are equally without cosmic meaning, so you're free to choose based on which one allows you to live more fully, more authentically, with more passion and presence. Second, you begin to value the quality of your present experience, instead of always sacrificing the present on the altar of some hypothetical future. You stop living for retirement, for the weekend, for when you achieve that goal. You begin to ask, am I present now? Am I really experiencing my life now? Or am I just going through the motions waiting for something better to happen later? And when you begin to prioritize being present, something interesting happens to your choices. You stop doing things just because you should, just because it's expected, just because it will take you somewhere. You begin to do things because you genuinely want to do them, because they bring richness and texture to your lived experience. It can be something as simple as taking your coffee slowly in the morning instead of gulping it down while rushing. It can be choosing a job that pays less, but that you really love, instead of a job that pays more, but that sucks your soul. It's these small choices, repeated day after day, that gradually transform your life from an anxious pursuit of external meaning to a celebration of what's already here. Third, you discover a new way of relating to other human beings. Before awakening, many of your relationships were transactional in some way. You were seeking something from other people: validation, security, distraction from your existential loneliness. But when you recognize the absurd and accept the fundamental loneliness of being a conscious individual in an indifferent universe, paradoxically, you become capable of much deeper connection, because you're no longer trying to use others to fill a void inside you. You're meeting others from a place of fullness, or at least of acceptance of your condition, and in that space, solidarity becomes possible. Solidarity for Camus was crucial. It's the recognition that we're all in the same absurd situation. We're all conscious beings facing our mortality and the lack of inherent meaning, and in this shared recognition, there's a form of connection that transcends all superficial differences. You and I, regardless of our different circumstances, face the same fundamental condition. And there's something beautiful in suffering together, not in the sense of drowning in misery, but in the sense of honestly recognizing our shared situation and choosing to support each other through it. And finally, you discover the role of passion in conscious life. Camus spoke a lot about living with passion, with intensity, with total surrender to experience. Not passion in the romantic sense necessarily, but passion in the sense of being completely alive to whatever you're doing. When you eat with all your attention. When you create with all your energy. When you love with all your heart, not because it will last forever, not because it will complete you, but simply because this is what it means to be alive. It's this passion, this intensity of experience that becomes your response to the absurd. Instead of fleeing from life or passively resigning yourself to it, you embrace it fiercely. You say yes to all experiences, the joys and the pains, the triumphs and the failures, knowing that everything is fleeting, everything is absurd ultimately, but everything is all you have. This life, with all its confusion and beauty, is the only stage where you can perform. And so you decide to perform with everything you have, not for an audience, not for some final judgment, but simply because you choose to do so. Before we continue, I want to pause and invite you to something. If this content is resonating with you, if these explorations about the absurd and authentic life are touching something true in your experience, consider subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell. Because in the upcoming videos, we're going to dive even deeper into these territories. We're going to explore how different existentialist philosophers dealt with questions of meaning, freedom, anguish, and authenticity. We're going to look at practical applications of these ideas in different areas of life. And we're going to continue this conversation we're having now, this honest exploration of what it means to be human in a universe that owes us nothing. So subscribe so you don't miss this content. And while you're there, leave a like on this video if it helped you in some way. This helps the algorithm show this content to more people who might need to hear exactly these words today. Now let's go to the final territory, the territory of integration. Because recognizing the absurd is one thing, accepting the absurd is another, but integrating this acceptance into a lived life is the real challenge. And this is where most people stumble. They have the intellectual insight, they understand the philosophy, but when Monday morning comes and the alarm clock rings, they don't know how to translate this understanding into action. How do you live a life conscious of the absurd, without falling into nihilism or despair? How do you maintain lightness and passion when you're conscious that none of this matters in the grand scheme of things? And Camus' answer is surprisingly simple, almost disappointing in its simplicity. You simply choose. At each moment you make a choice. And the sum of these choices, repeated thousands of times throughout your life, is what constitutes your revolt against the absurd, your affirmation of life, your yes to existence. You wake up in the morning and the absurd is there, the lack of inherent meaning is there, but you choose to get up anyway. Not because you have to, but because you can. You go to work not because work will save you or complete you, but because you choose to contribute something, even if small, to the world around you. You do your work with excellence not because someone is watching or because it will take you somewhere, but simply because you choose to do things well. It's a matter of personal dignity, of internal integrity. You eat not just to survive, but savoring the food, appreciating the sensory experience of being in a body that can feel pleasure. You walk not just to get somewhere, but feeling the ground beneath your feet, the air in your lungs, life pulsing through you. It's these small moments of presence, of conscious choice, of active engagement with life, that constitute the revolt that Camus proposes. And what happens over time if you persist in this practice is that the lack of motivation that brought you here gradually transforms into something different. It doesn't go back to being the anxious and fear-based motivation of before. It doesn't become that desperate need to conquer and prove and achieve. Instead, a different kind of energy emerges, a calmer energy, but also more constant. It's the energy that comes from being aligned with the truth of your existence, from no longer being in denial about the absurd nature of life, but also not being resigned to it. It's the energy of conscious revolt, of the deliberate yes to life, despite everything. And this energy is surprisingly sustainable because it doesn't depend on external circumstances. It doesn't matter if you're successful or failed by conventional standards. It doesn't matter if you're recognized or ignored. It doesn't matter if you achieve your goals or not. The energy comes from within, from your fundamental decision to live fully, to experience deeply, to create meaning where there is no given meaning. Camus also spoke about the importance of revolt, not just as a personal attitude, but as an ethical stance toward the world. Because when you recognize the absurd and choose to live authentically anyway, you become incapable of treating others as means to your ends. You see each person as facing the same absurd condition as you, and in that recognition, a natural ethics of respect and compassion arises. You can no longer justify using or manipulating or harming others because you see that they are fundamentally like you, fragile consciousnesses trying to make sense of an existence that offers no guarantees. And so your revolt extends beyond yourself. You revolt not just for your own freedom and authenticity, but for the freedom and authenticity of all. You become someone who opposes systems that deny people's humanity, that reduce individuals to tools or statistics or resources, not because you have some grand moral theory, but simply because you recognize the inherent value of conscious experience, the preciousness of each individual life trying to navigate the absurd. And there's something deeply liberating in this stance. Because it means you no longer need to ask yourself what your purpose is, what the meaning of your life is, what you should be doing with your limited time here. These questions lose their power over you. Instead, you ask different questions. What brings me joy now? What allows me to experience life more fully in this moment? How can I contribute to reducing suffering around me? How can I create beauty where there is ugliness? How can I bring authenticity where there is falseness? How can I live in a way that when I reach the end, I can look back and feel that I truly lived, that I didn't waste my precious time chasing mirages or running from myself? And these questions generate very different answers from conventional questions about purpose and destiny. They lead you to choices that are based on what you truly value, not on what you were taught to value. So let's return to the original question, why don't you have motivation after spiritual awakening? And now, after all this exploration, maybe you can see that the question itself was poorly formulated. It's not that you don't have motivation. It's that you're in a process of profound transformation where the old type of motivation based on seeking external validation and fleeing from your existential loneliness, is dying, and something new, something more authentic, is trying to be born. But births are messy processes. There's pain, there's confusion, there are moments of doubt where you wonder if something will really emerge from this darkness. And I want to assure you that yes, something will emerge. But you cannot force the process. You cannot rush the gestation. You can only trust it, be present with it, allow it to unfold in its own time. And while you wait, while you're in this intermediate space between the old and the new, you can practice the small acts of revolt that Camus suggests. Choose to be present. Choose to do things with integrity, even if they don't matter in the grand scheme of things. Choose to find beauty in small details. Choose to connect authentically with others. Choose above all to continue choosing life, moment after moment, day after day. And there's one last image that Camus leaves us, and it's the most powerful image of all. It's the image of Sisyphus at the moment when he descends the mountain after the rock has rolled back down, walking back to start his work again. Camus says that it's in this descent, in this pause between one effort and the next, that Sisyphus is most conscious of his condition. He clearly sees the absurd of his situation, and it's precisely in this moment of clearest awareness that Camus invites us to imagine him happy. Not happy in a delirious or deluded way, but happy in a deep and unshakable way. Happy because he's no longer resisting what is. Happy because he's made peace with his condition. Happy because he found freedom within the very thing that seemed to imprison him. The rock is no longer his enemy or his burden. It's simply his rock, his work, his way of saying yes to being alive. And when you reach this point, when you make peace with the absurd of your own life, when you stop resisting what is and begin to embrace it fully, you discover that the lack of motivation was just a temporary symptom of transition. What emerges on the other side isn't motivation in the old sense, but something much better. It's passion, it's presence. It's the capacity to be totally alive to each moment, knowing it's all absurd, knowing it means nothing in the grand scheme of things, and choosing to live intensely anyway. Because that's your revolt. That's your freedom. That's your way of being human in an indifferent universe. And there's nothing more beautiful, more worthy, more authentic than that.